The morning started like any other at Buckingham Palace. Queen Camilla was having her usual breakfast of tea and toast in the private dining room when her personal secretary knocked on the door. Margaret entered with a worried expression that immediately caught Camilla's attention. "Your Majesty." "The king has requested an urgent meeting with you in his private study," Margaret said, her voice trembling slightly. He seemed quite serious about it. Camilla felt a strange knot forming in her stomach. Charles rarely called for urgent meetings unless something was terribly wrong. She remembered the last time he had done this. It was when they received news about a serious security threat. But this felt different somehow, as she walked through the long corridors of the palace. Camilla noticed that the usual cheerful greetings from the staff seemed forced today. The maids looked away quickly when she passed, and even the guards seemed unusually tense. Something was definitely happening, but she couldn't figure out what it was. When she reached Charles's study, she found him standing by the window, looking out at the palace gardens. His shoulders were rigid, and he didn't turn around when she entered. This was unlike him. Charles was always warm and welcoming, especially with her. "Charles, what's this about?" Camilla asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Margaret said it was urgent. Finally, he turned around, and Camilla was shocked by what she saw. Charles looked like he had aged 10 years overnight. His eyes were red and tired, and there were deep lines of stress across his forehead. In his hand, he held a thick folder filled with documents. "Camilla, please sit down," he said quietly. "We need to talk about something very serious." The way he said her name, not my dear or darling as he usually did, sent chills down her spine. She had never heard him sound so formal with her before. She took a seat in the chair across from his desk, her heart beating faster with each passing second. Charles walked over to his desk and placed the folder in front of her. "This arrived this morning from the Privy Council. They've been conducting an investigation for the past 3 months." "Investigation? About what?" Camilla's voice came out as barely a whisper. "About certain financial decisions made by your office. About charitable donations that were supposed to go to specific causes, but ended up elsewhere. About meetings you had with people who weren't properly vetted by security." Camilla felt the blood drain from her face. She remembered those meetings. They were with old friends who wanted to discuss setting up a new charity. She had thought everything was handled properly by her staff. How could this have gone so wrong? "Charles, I don't understand. Everything I did was with the best intentions. If there were mistakes, they weren't intentional. You have to believe me." The king sat down heavily in his chair. For the first time since she had known him, he looked truly defeated. "I want to believe you, Camilla, but the evidence they've presented is quite damaging. The media has somehow gotten hold of parts of this story, and they're preparing to run with it. What does this mean for us? For our marriage?" Charles was quiet for a long moment, staring at the papers in front of him. When he finally spoke, his words hit her like physical blows. "The Privy Council is recommending that your royal titles be suspended pending a full investigation. They're saying it's the only way to protect the reputation of the crown." Camilla couldn't breathe. Everything she had worked for, everything she had become, was being threatened. She had spent years earning the respect of the British people after the difficult early years of their relationship. She had thrown herself into royal duties, supporting dozens of charities, representing Britain around the world. How long would this suspension last? She managed to ask. "They don't know. It could be months, maybe longer. The investigation needs to be thorough, and then there would need to be a period of rebuilding public trust." Outside the study windows, Camilla could see the palace gardens, where she had spent so many happy hours. She thought about all the events she had planned, the patronages she supported, the people who depended on her work. How could she face them now? What about the children? William, Harry, the grandchildren? Do they know? Charles shook his head. "Not yet, but they'll need to be told soon. This can't be kept secret much longer." The silence in the room was deafening. Camilla realized that her whole world was about to change, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The woman who had become queen consort was about to lose everything she had worked so hard to achieve as she sat there. Trying to process what was happening, Camilla couldn't help but wonder how her enemies at court might be celebrating this news. She had always known that some people never truly accepted her, never forgot her role in Charles's first marriage. Were they behind this somehow? The king reached across the desk and took her hand. We'll get through this, Camilla. Whatever happens, we'll face it together. But as she looked into his tired eyes, Camilla wasn't sure if even Charles truly believed his own words. The palace that had become her home suddenly felt very cold and unwelcoming. Within hours of the meeting with Charles, news of the investigation began leaking to the press. Camilla watched in horror from her private sitting room as the first reports appeared on the television news. The headlines were brutal and unforgiving. Her phone started ringing constantly. Her children, Tom and Laura, called in panic after seeing the news. "Ma'am, what's happening?" "The reporters are already outside our houses," Laura said, her voice shaking with worry. Camilla tried to explain the situation to her children. But how could she make them understand something she barely understood herself? The allegations seemed to come out of nowhere, involving money and meetings she remembered differently than how they were being described. Meanwhile, the palace staff were acting strangely around her. Some avoided eye contact completely, while others whispered in corners when they thought she wasn't looking. The head butler, who had always been respectful and warm, now spoke to her in short, formal sentences. Margaret, her loyal secretary, was one of the few who remained supportive. "Ma'am, I've been going through all our records from the past year," she said privately. "Something doesn't add up about these accusations. The meetings they're talking about, I have different notes about what was discussed." This gave Camilla a small spark of hope. Maybe there was a way to prove that this was all a terrible misunderstanding. But as she looked through the files Margaret had prepared, she realized how complicated everything had become. There were so many meetings, so many charity events, so many financial transactions. It would take months to sort through it all. That evening, Charles called an emergency meeting with his senior advisors. Camilla wasn't invited, which hurt more than she expected. She could hear raised voices coming from the meeting room down the hall, but couldn't make out what was being said. When Charles returned to their private apartments late that night, he looked exhausted. "The press office is being bombarded with calls," he told her. "They want a statement from us by tomorrow morning." "What kind of statement?" "They want to know if the allegations are true, what we're doing about it, and whether your titles will be affected." Camilla felt sick to her stomach. The thought of having to make a public statement about accusations she didn't fully understand was terrifying. What should we say? "Our lawyers are working on something. But Camilla, you need to prepare yourself. The Privy Council is meeting tomorrow, and they're going to make their decision about your titles." That night, Camilla couldn't sleep. She walked around their private apartment, looking at the photographs and personal items they had collected over their years together. There were pictures from their wedding day, from state visits to other countries, from charity events where she had felt truly useful and appreciated. She remembered her coronation. When she had finally become queen consort, the British people had seemed to accept her at last. The newspapers had written positive stories about her dedication to duty. She had felt like she truly belonged in the royal family. Now it all seemed to be slipping away. The next morning brought even worse news. Someone had leaked additional details about the investigation to the press. The newspapers were full of stories about secret meetings and questionable financial decisions. Most painful of all, some articles brought up her past, questioning whether she had ever truly been suitable to be queen. Camilla's protection officer informed her that they had to change her schedule for the day. "Ma'am, there are protesters gathering outside the palace gates. It's not safe for you to leave for your planned engagements." Looking out the window, Camilla could see the crowds growing larger. Some people carried signs demanding answers. Others were calling for her to step down voluntarily. The same people who had once cheered for her now seemed to view her as a threat to the monarchy. The phone call she had been dreading came at noon. The Privy Council had reached their decision. Charles took the call in his office while Camilla waited in the next room, pacing nervously. When he emerged, his face told her everything she needed to know. "They voted to recommend the suspension of your titles, effective immediately," he said quietly. "I'm sorry, Camilla. I fought for you, but the pressure from Parliament and the public is too great." "So what does this mean exactly?" "You'll no longer be able to use the title of Queen Consort. You can't attend any official royal functions or represent the crown in any capacity. Your charitable patronages will need to be put on hold. Camilla felt like the ground was disappearing beneath her feet. Everything that had defined her life for the past few years was being taken away. In our marriage? What happens to us? Charles took her hands in his. Our marriage remains unchanged. You're still my wife, and this is still your home. But officially, you'll no longer have any royal role. The cruelest part was that Camilla still believed she was innocent of the serious wrongdoing being alleged. Yes, there might have been administrative mistakes, but nothing that warranted this level of punishment. She felt like she was being sacrificed to protect the institution of the monarchy. As news of the Privy Council's decision spread, the palace phone system crashed from the volume of calls from journalists around the world. This was becoming an international story. Camilla was at the center of it all. That afternoon, she had to watch as the official announcement was made. Standing at her window, she could see the crowd's reaction as the news broke. Some people cheered, while others looked shocked. Her life had become a spectacle for the entire world to judge. The days following the announcement were some of the darkest in Camilla's life. The media circus outside the palace was relentless. Helicopters circled overhead, photographers with long lenses tried to capture pictures of her through the windows, and reporters shouted questions whenever any royal car left the grounds. Inside the palace, the atmosphere was tense and uncomfortable. Many of the staff members who had once been friendly and chatty now barely acknowledged her presence. It was as if she had become invisible overnight. Despite still living in the same rooms and walking the same corridors, the most painful part was watching how the situation affected Charles. As king, he was facing enormous pressure from all sides. Parliament was demanding answers. The Commonwealth countries were expressing concern, and his approval ratings were dropping rapidly. She could see the stress taking a physical toll on him. Maybe I should leave, Camilla suggested one evening as they sat together in their private sitting room. If I went away for a while, perhaps the pressure on you would decrease. Charles looked horrified at the suggestion. Absolutely not. Running away would make you look guilty, and it would leave you completely defenseless against these attacks. We face this together, or not at all. But Camilla wasn't sure how much more she could take. Her own children were now being harassed by reporters. Tom had 2 higher security guards for his family, and Laura was afraid to take her children to school because of the photographers waiting outside. The investigation was moving slowly, which only made things worse. Every day brought new speculation in the newspapers about what the investigators might find. Some articles suggested that the financial irregularities went back years. Others hinted at connections to foreign businessmen who might have had improper influence. Meanwhile, Camilla's former staff members were being questioned extensively. Some remained loyal and defended her actions, but others seemed eager to distance themselves from the controversy. She was particularly hurt when her former private secretary, who had worked with her for 5 years, gave an interview suggesting that Camilla had been difficult to work with and had often ignored protocol. The charitable organizations that Camilla had supported were also suffering. Many were losing donations because of their association with her. Some chose to quietly remove her name from their materials, while others publicly distanced themselves from her. It was heartbreaking to see years of good work being undone. 3 weeks after the title suspension, Camilla received an unexpected visitor. Princess Anne, Charles's sister, asked to speak with her privately. They met in the blue drawing room, where Anne got straight to the point. "This whole situation is ridiculous," Anne said bluntly. "I've known you for decades, and while we haven't always seen eye to eye, I know you're not capable of the kind of deliberate wrongdoing they're suggesting." Camilla felt tears welling up in her eyes. It was the first time in weeks that someone in the royal family had expressed any support for her. "Thank you, Anne. That means more than you know. The problem is, this isn't really about whether you did anything wrong," Anne continued. "This is about certain people who have never accepted your place in this family, and they've finally found a way to strike back." "What do you mean?" "Think about it, Camilla. These allegations surfaced right after you had that very successful tour of Canada, right after the polls showed that public approval of you was at an all-time high. That's not a coincidence. This conversation planted a seed of suspicion in Camilla's mind. She began to wonder if someone had deliberately orchestrated this crisis to destroy her reputation. But who would have the power and motivation to do such a thing? Her answer came a few days later, when Margaret made a disturbing discovery. While organizing old files, she found evidence that someone had been accessing Camilla's private correspondence and financial records without authorization. The access had been happening for months, long before the investigation began. "Ma'am, I think someone has been building a case against you for a very long time," Margaret said nervously. "These aren't random mistakes being discovered. This looks like a coordinated effort to collect information that could be used against you." Camilla felt a chill run down her spine. If Margaret was right, this meant that someone close to the royal family had been planning her downfall for months or even years. But who had the access and knowledge to pull off something like this? The list of suspects was shorter than she had initially thought. It had to be someone with high-level clearance, someone who understood the royal financial systems, and someone who had both the motivation and the connections to influence the investigation. As she thought about the people who met these criteria, one name kept coming to mind. It was someone who had never fully accepted her marriage to Charles. Someone who had the intelligence and connections to orchestrate such a plan, and someone who stood to benefit if she was removed from the picture. But proving her suspicions would be nearly impossible. This person was too smart to leave obvious evidence, and they had too much power for anyone to question their motives openly. That night, as Camilla lay awake thinking about everything that had happened, she realized that she was fighting two battles. The first was the official investigation into the financial irregularities. The second was a shadow war, being fought by someone who wanted to destroy her place in the royal family forever. The question was whether she had enough strength left to fight both battles simultaneously, especially when she wasn't even sure who her real enemy was. As the investigation entered its second month, Camilla decided to fight back. She couldn't continue to sit passively while her reputation was destroyed. Her marriage was strained to the breaking point. Working secretly with Margaret and a trusted lawyer, she began conducting her own investigation into who might be behind the attacks. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. James, a young IT specialist who worked in the palace's communications department, approached Margaret with concerning information. He had noticed unusual activity in the computer systems over the past year. Someone had been accessing files they shouldn't have access to. "I thought it was strange at the time," James explained nervously, "but the person doing it had high-level clearance, so I assumed it was authorized. Now that all this trouble has started, I'm wondering if I should have reported it." Margaret brought this information to Camilla, who realized they might finally have a lead. "Can you find out exactly what files were accessed and when?" she asked James, working carefully to avoid detection. James began tracing the digital footprints left by the unauthorized access. What he discovered was shocking. For over 18 months, someone had been systematically collecting information about Camilla's activities, her staff, her financial decisions, and her private correspondence. Even more disturbing, the access pattern showed that this person had been focusing specifically on anything that could be made to look suspicious or inappropriate. They had ignored hundreds of routine transactions and meetings, cherry-picking only the ones that could potentially be misrepresented. "Ma'am, this isn't an investigation," Margaret said grimly. "This is a character assassination that's been planned for years." Armed with this new evidence, Camilla decided to confront Charles with her suspicions. She found him in his study late one evening, going over papers related to the ongoing crisis. "Charles, I need to tell you something important," she began. "I don't think this investigation is legitimate. I think someone has been deliberately setting me up." At first, Charles was skeptical. The idea that someone within the palace would orchestrate such an elaborate scheme seemed impossible to him. But as Camilla presented the evidence James had gathered, his expression grew more serious. "If what you're suggesting is true, this goes beyond just attacking you," Charles said slowly. "This is an attack on the monarchy itself. Whoever is doing this is willing to damage the institution to achieve their goals." "I think I know who it might be," Camilla said quietly. "But we need more proof before we can make any accusations." Over the next week, they worked carefully to gather additional evidence. James continued monitoring computer activity while staying under the radar. Margaret reviewed years of correspondence and meeting records. Camilla herself began to remember small incidents and conversations that had seemed innocent at the time, but now appeared suspicious. The picture that emerged was of a carefully orchestrated campaign spanning nearly 2 years. Someone had been building a file of potentially damaging information, while simultaneously cultivating relationships with key members of the Privy Council and influential journalists. Most disturbing of all, they discovered that the timing of the investigation's launch had been deliberately chosen. It coincided with a period when Charles was dealing with health issues and was less able to provide strong support for his wife. The perpetrator had waited for the perfect moment to strike. The identity of their enemy became clear when Margaret discovered a pattern in the leaked information. Only someone with access to the highest levels of royal correspondence could have known. Some of the details that had appeared in the press, the list of people with that level of access was very small when they finally confirmed their suspicions. Camilla felt both vindicated and betrayed. The person behind her downfall was someone she had trusted, someone who had smiled to her face while secretly working to destroy her. "We have to be very careful about how we handle this," Charles warned. "If we make accusations without absolutely solid proof, it could backfire badly. This person is too powerful and too clever to be taken down easily." But Camilla was determined to clear her name. "I'm not going to let them win," she declared. "I've lost my titles, my role, and nearly my reputation. I'm not going to lose my marriage and my family too." The challenge was how to expose the truth without causing a scandal that could damage the monarchy permanently. They needed to find a way to reveal the conspiracy while protecting the institution of the crown. Charles suggested bringing in the head of palace security, someone they both trusted completely. Together they could build an airtight case that would not only clear Camilla's name, but also ensure that the real perpetrator faced appropriate consequences as they planned their counterattack. Camilla realized that this experience had changed her fundamentally. She had learned that even within the royal family, there were people willing to use any means necessary to achieve their goals. The naive trust she had once had was gone forever. But she had also discovered reserves of strength she didn't know she possessed. The woman who had once worried about every public appearance and newspaper headline was now prepared to fight for her place in the family and her husband's love. The battle was far from over. But for the first time in months, Camilla felt like she had weapons to fight back. The question was whether it was too late to save everything she had built, or whether the truth could still set her free. The confrontation that would change everything happened on a rainy Thursday morning in November. Camilla, Charles, and the head of palace security, Sir David Morrison, had spent weeks preparing their evidence. They had computer records, financial documents, witness statements, and a timeline that clearly showed the deliberate nature of the conspiracy against her. The person they suspected, Lady Elizabeth Worthington, the Queen's former private secretary who had remained influential in palace circles, was invited to what she believed was a routine briefing about ongoing security concerns. She entered Charles's study with her usual confident demeanor, completely unaware that her carefully constructed plan was about to unravel. "Elizabeth, thank you for coming," Charles said formally. "We have some serious matters to discuss with you." Lady Worthington took a seat across from the king's desk, her expression politely interested. She had perfected the art of appearing helpful and concerned while hiding her true intentions. For nearly 40 years, she had served the royal family, gaining their trust while quietly nursing her resentments. "Before we begin," Charles continued, "I want you to know that Sir David is recording this conversation, and everything you say will be part of an official record." For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed Elizabeth's face. "Is there some sort of problem, Your Majesty?" Camilla leaned forward in her chair. After months of being on the defensive, she was finally ready to go on the attack. "Elizabeth, we know what you've been doing. We have proof that you've been systematically collecting information about me for nearly 2 years, waiting for the right moment to use it." "I'm sure I don't know what you mean," Elizabeth replied. but her voice had lost some of its steadiness. Sir David opened a thick folder and began laying out documents on the desk. We have computer records showing that you accessed Mrs. Parker Bowles' private files over 200 times. Without authorization, we have copies of emails you sent to journalists, feeding them selected pieces of information. We have evidence that you influenced members of the Privy Council by sharing misleading interpretations of perfectly legal financial transactions. Elizabeth's composure was beginning to crack, but she wasn't ready to surrender. These are serious accusations. I hope you have very solid proof before making such claims. Oh, we do, Camilla said quietly. We also know why you did it. You never forgave Charles for marrying me. You thought I was beneath the royal family, and you couldn't stand seeing me succeed in my role as queen consort? The older woman's mask finally slipped completely. Years of suppressed anger and resentment came flooding to the surface. You're right, she said with venom in her voice. I never accepted you, and I never will. You destroyed the marriage of the future King of England. You made a mockery of everything this family stands for. That's enough, Charles said sharply. Your personal feelings don't give you the right to fabricate evidence or manipulate official investigations. But Elizabeth wasn't finished. Do you think the British people will ever truly accept her? Do you think history will remember her kindly? I simply helped reveal the truth about who she really is. The truth? Camilla stood up, her voice rising with emotion. The truth is that every single one of your allegations was based on misrepresentations and half-truths. The truth is that you violated your oath of loyalty to this family and abused your position of trust. Sir David had been taking careful notes throughout the confrontation. Lady Worthington, I need to inform you that you're being terminated from all positions within the royal household, effective immediately. Furthermore, we're referring this matter to the Metropolitan Police for investigation of potential criminal charges. The reality of her situation finally hit Elizabeth. Her career was over, her reputation would be destroyed, and she might face prosecution for her actions. You can't prove that I did anything illegal, she said desperately. Actually, we can, Charles replied. Computer fraud, violation of privacy laws, conspiracy to commit libel, the list is quite extensive. You've been very thorough in your destruction, Elizabeth, but you were also careless enough to leave evidence. Security officers escorted Lady Worthington from the palace. Camilla felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that the truth was finally coming out, but sadness that so much damage had been done by someone who should have been protecting the royal family. The next step was even more challenging: clearing Camilla's name publicly and restoring her titles. The evidence they had gathered proved that the investigation had been based on deliberately misleading information. But convincing the Privy Council and the public required careful handling. Charles called an emergency meeting with his senior advisors to discuss how to proceed. We need to present this information in a way that clears Camilla without creating a bigger scandal about corruption within the palace, he explained. The palace lawyers worked around the clock to prepare a comprehensive report that would vindicate Camilla while minimizing damage to the monarchy's reputation. They had to be careful not to suggest that the entire investigation had been compromised, as that would raise questions about the competence of the institutions involved. Meanwhile, Camilla had to resist the urge to immediately go public with her vindication. I know you want to clear your name right away, Charles told her, but we have to do this properly. If we rush, we could make mistakes that our enemies will use against us. As news of Lady Worthington's dismissal began to spread through the palace, the atmosphere started to change. Staff members who had been cold and distant began to treat Camilla with more respect. Some even approached her privately to apologize for their behavior during the crisis. But the real test would come when the truth was revealed to the public. After months of negative coverage, would the British people be willing to give Camilla another chance? And more importantly, could she find the strength to return to public life after everything she had endured? The day of Camilla's vindication arrived 3 weeks later. Charles had decided to address the nation personally, explaining the conspiracy that had led to his wife's title being stripped and announcing that all charges against her were being dropped. It was a risky strategy, admitting that the palace had been infiltrated by someone with Malicious intent could damage public confidence in the monarchy. Camilla watched nervously. From the private sitting room, as Charles delivered his speech from the throne room, he looked every inch the king as he spoke directly to the camera, his voice steady and authoritative. "I must inform the nation that my wife, Queen Camilla, has been the victim of a deliberate campaign of character assassination," he began. "Over the past several months, a trusted member of our household systematically manipulated information to create false impressions of wrongdoing where none existed," he went on to explain how the investigation had uncovered evidence of the conspiracy. Without going into details that might compromise ongoing legal proceedings, the Queen Consort's titles are hereby restored, effective immediately. She has my complete confidence and support. The reaction was immediate and intense. Within hours, the palace switchboard was overwhelmed with calls from journalists, politicians, and members of the public. Social media exploded with debates about whether Camilla had been treated fairly and whether the monarchy could be trusted to investigate itself. Some newspapers that had been harshly critical of Camilla now found themselves in the awkward position of having to admit they had been misled. The Daily Herald, which had run particularly damaging headlines, published a front-page apology, acknowledging that their coverage had been based on incomplete and misleading information. But not everyone was ready to forgive and forget. Protesters gathered outside Parliament, demanding a full independent investigation into how the conspiracy had been allowed to continue for so long. Some called for Camilla to voluntarily step aside, arguing that too much damage had been done to the monarchy's reputation. Inside the palace, the mood was cautiously optimistic. Margaret had prepared a schedule of engagements for Camilla's return to public life, but they decided to start slowly with less controversial events. Her first public appearance would be at a children's hospital, where the focus would be on the patients rather than the royal controversy. The night before her return to duty, Camilla couldn't sleep. She walked through the palace corridors, remembering all the events that had led to this moment. The past few months had been the most difficult of her life, but they had also taught her valuable lessons about resilience and the importance of fighting for what was right. When she finally appeared in public again, stepping out of the royal car at Great Ormond Street Hospital, the crowd's reaction was mixed. Some people cheered and waved, clearly happy to see her return. Others remained silent, their expressions skeptical. A few protesters held signs questioning whether she could be trusted. But as Camilla began visiting the young patients, something magical happened. The children didn't care about royal controversies or palace politics. They were just excited to meet a real queen. Their joy and innocence reminded everyone watching why the royal family existed: to serve and inspire, not to be consumed by petty conflicts. The images of Camilla, reading stories to sick children and comforting worried parents, dominated the evening news. For the first time in months, the coverage was overwhelmingly positive. The British public was reminded of the woman they had grown to respect before the scandal broke. Over the following weeks, Camilla gradually returned to her full schedule of royal duties. She visited food banks, opened new community centers, and supported the charities that had remained loyal during her darkest hours. Each appearance helped rebuild her reputation and strengthen public support. The legal case against Lady Worthington proceeded slowly through the courts. She was eventually convicted of computer fraud and breach of trust, receiving a suspended sentence and a substantial fine. More importantly, the trial provided official confirmation of the conspiracy. Vindicating Camilla completely in the eyes of the law, Charles and Camilla's marriage emerged from the crisis stronger than before. The experience of fighting together against a common enemy had deepened their bond, proven that their relationship could survive even the most severe tests. 6 months after her titles were restored, Camilla was more popular than ever. Polls showed that the British public admired how she had handled the crisis with dignity and grace. Her approval ratings reached levels that would have seemed impossible during the darkest days of the scandal. The conspiracy had backfired completely. Instead of destroying Camilla, it had ultimately made her stronger and more sympathetic in the eyes of the public. The woman who had once worried about every headline now faced the future with confidence. knowing that she had survived the worst that her enemies could throw at her, as she and Charles attended a state banquet that autumn. Camilla reflected on everything that had happened. The ordeal had been painful and frightening, but it had also taught her that she truly belonged in the royal family. She had earned her place not just through marriage, but through her own strength, dignity, and commitment to service. The palace that had once felt cold and unwelcoming during her crisis now felt like home again. The staff treated her with genuine respect. The British people had embraced her return, and her husband looked at her with pride and admiration. Lady Worthington's final act of revenge had been to try to destroy the woman she could never accept. Instead, she had given Camilla the ultimate gift, the knowledge that she was strong enough to overcome anything and that her place in the royal family was unshakable.